Nyallo. Welcome in, welcome in. I hope everyone's having a good weekend. Or, end of your weekend. I forgot it's Sunday. Nyallo. Nyallo, nyallo. I have an outline. This is I guess you could say this is my aura. um, is the music alright? I hope it's not too loud. Aura. For anyone just joining, music is perfect. Thank you. I have tried ASMR before, but I wanted to try it in a slightly different way today. And I'll be reading It Takes a Team to Raise a Trainer. And here, I can quickly read the author's note. This is an anonymous trainer's story of how she caught and evolved her 6 teammates. There's no journey per se. She lives in a people don't go on journeys, but they still train Pokemon kind of alternate universe. And I thought that sounded so cozy and cute. Yeah. Um, but yeah, I hope everyone's been having a good Sunday. Kuro and we've had a pretty busy Sunday. We went to a national park or forest. I don't know what it's actually called, but we went there with my family, and it was fun. It was a lot of hiking and a lot of walking, and I think we're both a little sore, but overall, feeling good. I sore. I'm sorry. More than a little. um, I I've also my throat's a little scratchy, so I'm gonna try my best to mute whenever I do need to clear my throat. But yeah, I think I'm gonna wait for the first timer message to pop off, and then we can start getting into it. Oh, also, just a heads up, a lot of the sound redeems have been disabled due to the fact that they aren't really ASMR friendly. Um, they're quite loud, and yeah, see, there's no noise with that one. I've also muted a lot of them. Just you can still redeem it, and it'll still count. Wait, was that uh, was that was that audible to you, or was that just to me? I heard ba-da-doom. No sound. Okay. Whew. That scared me. Um. Yeah. So that's a change, and another change is Peg. Welcome in. Welcome in. I definitely still hear the all the redeems, so that's interesting. I'm probably actually just turn that down for myself too. It's a little distracting. Um, what was I saying? Oh, uh, another change I made is we're gonna be running only a minute and a half of breaks instead of the full 3 minute breaks. However, it's every 30 minutes rather than every 60 minutes now. My my thinking behind that is that you know, missing a minute and a half of gameplay. This, I guess, applies towards my normal streams. Missing a minute and a half of gameplay is not as much as 3 minutes. So, you know, give and take. Cozy as cute as cake. Ah, hello. I was trying to look for a book that maybe I could sit on and read from, but I couldn't find any, and that's okay. Oh, Caden B, thank you for the follow. You're now part of the cozy crew where every sip is a story. Oh, but welcome in, welcome in. ASMR is not normally what I do, but I hope you enjoy your stay here. Your voice is so. Thank you, thank you. welcome in. I hope you enjoy your stay. And if you like some gaming streams, I that's my usual cup of tea. I just wanted to give ASMR a shot tonight, and seeing how it's Pokemon month, I figured I'd read a Pokemon story today. What do you do to get your voice so majestic? um, I just open my mouth and the words come out. Uh-oh. I think I might have messed up the timers. Oops. So anyway, once I start reading, I won't be reading chat or uh, responding to redeems just for the sake of immersion. However, in between chapters, I'll take a look at chat just to get caught up on everything. And if I have any hydrate reminders, then I'll get caught up with that as well. No way he was born with it. He must have done some muscle training. I can't say I have done any vocal training. I wish I did. My voice is a little scratchy, or my throat is scratchy right now. And if I knew any vocal warm ups, I probably would have done them beforehand. So if there's just a pocket of silence, that's just me muting and clearing my throat. But without further ado, let's thank you for the head pads. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the story, starting with chapter 1. My starter. When I was 4, I got a Mareep for my birthday. I named her Snowflake. My parents tell me it was because I thought her wool looked like snow. So now, whenever anyone asks me about my first Pokemon, I always describe her as my Ampharos instead of calling her by name. Otherwise, they think she's an ice type. My mom used to make clothes for me out of her wool. She'd spin the yarn with her Donphan and dye it with her Vileplume. The red of the dye was exactly like her Pokemon's petals, which inspired my mom to knit her Vileplume's polka dot pattern into all my sweaters, and hats, and mittens. It got so pervasive that I'm pretty sure Snow thought the polka dots meant I had evolved until she evolved herself, and my mom no longer had any wool to make Vileplume sweaters with. Snow evolved into a Flaffy on the night of the Christmas parade when I was 8. A float passed by with all kinds of light-up Pokemon, and she was so dazzled her tail light started glowing brightly as she could manage. And when that wasn't bright enough, her body started glowing. As luck would have it, a local camera crew was filming right in front of us and caught her evolution on camera. The next morning, Snowflake was on the news under the title Merry Christmas and Flaffy Holidays. She evolved into an Ampharos when I was 11 and waiting for the late bus. It was already dark out, and Snowflake was so hungry she was chewing on my coat. Not wanting to see my favorite coat destroyed, I dug out my lunchbox and gave her the rest of my food. After wolfing down every last crumb and licking the box for good measure, Snow moaned and curled up into a ball. She does this fairly often. It usually means her tummy hurts because she snuck a few batteries or light bulbs behind my back. I'd been trying to ignore her whenever it happens to avoid encouraging that behavior. I focused on looking for the bus in order to not look at my Pokemon, so I didn't notice a thing until her next moan was much lower, and I turned around to see an Ampharos sitting where my Flaffy had been. I completely forgot about how I was supposed to be ignoring her, and threw my arms around Snow in my excitement. The jostling of her newly elongated neck was apparently the last straw, and with one last moan, she threw up the contents of her stomach all over my coat. Ironically, it would have been fine if Snow had been eating batteries like I suspected. They would have just bounced off my coat without issue. But it turns out she hadn't been sneaking battery snacks, so instead my coat got covered in ABC leftovers and was completely ruined because of it. When the bus finally arrived, Snowflake got to ride shotgun to keep her from throwing up more. She ended up staying at home for 3 days with a stomach bug she got from eating my food, but once she was better, I gave her a whole box of batteries to munch on, and I haven't fed her leftovers since. I also switched to waterproof coats. And that was the end of chapter 1. That was pretty cute. Oh, welcome in, Lulu. Welcome in. And thank you for the pinned message, honey. Cal won't be responding to chat or redeems while reading. We appreciate your understanding. Thank you for the head pats. Today has been busy and very rainy. How are you two? I'm doing really good. Oh, wow, you've had a pretty busy day. Is that message okay? That message is perfect. Thank you. Hi, hi. Just so yeah, this is just a cozy little Pokemon story, and let's go ahead and start chapter 2. Chapter 2, Peanut Wing. I never really understood why so many people actively dislike Zubat. Yeah, they're everywhere, and they can be aggressive, but it's not like they're strong enough to do any real damage, and they seem to know that they're weak, since they really only prey on little kids and their first Pokemon, which they still typically lose to. This sort of Zubat fighting had become a rite of passage among the second graders, and we'd have competitions to see who could defeat the most in a week. Snow and I won several times, because for some reason, Zubat kept fighting us. Most of my classmates would be attacked by 1 or 2 Zubat a night, but we were averaging 5. When I asked my dad why the Zubat kept attacking us, he told us that, with a few exceptions, Pokemon follow a code. If we make a Pokemon or their babies feel threatened, if we disturb them from sleeping or eating, or if we are careless and do something like step on their tail or destroy their home, the Pokemon will attack us, and we shouldn't fight. I'm supposed to tell Snow to use Thunder Wave, and then we're supposed to run back to the nearest road or lit area so we don't get in any more trouble. We haven't done anything to antagonize the Pokemon. That means it wants to fight for the sake of fighting. We can choose to engage or not. Dad said, until I catch more Pokemon, I shouldn't accept unless I think Snow can easily win on her own. And even then, if we start losing, she should light up her tail and my dad's Noctowl can come help us. After we learned why Pokemon fight, we tried to be careful and only battle willing Pokemon, which, 9 times out of 10, were Zubat. Not only that, both Snow and I started to notice something weird about the Zubat we were fighting. A lot of them had a weird mark on their wing, like a peanut, or a filled-in 8. Dad said he thought it was a birthmark, and it meant we were actually fighting the same Zubat again and again. I asked why a Pokemon would do that, especially since we always won, and he said it probably wanted me to train it. That's usually why, otherwise Pokemon attack. They want to see if you're a good trainer. If they attack multiple times, it means they're trying to get you to catch them. I said I didn't want to train a Zubat. Dad told me I should tell that to the Zubat so it can look for a trainer who does. The next night, Snow and I walked around as usual, and surprise, surprise, we were attacked by a Zubat with a peanut-shaped birthmark on its wing. Snow's wool started to glow. She was charging a Thundershock as usual, but I put my hand on her horn to stop her. When her wool went out, she lit up her tail bright enough so we could see, but not bright enough to call Dad's Noctowl. And I looked at the Zubat. It was fluttering in front of me, silent and blind. Hey, I don't want to train you. I mean, I bet you're nice, but I don't like Zubat that much. Mareep, Snow bleated in agreement. The Zubat stayed silent for a moment, Then it screeched and flapped off into the shadows. Snow and I both wandered home, pleased that we had done the right thing and let Peanut Wing know he should look for another trainer. We'd barely walked in the door when Dad's Houndoom came bounding over, barking like she does when she smells a stranger. Snow's always been afraid of her, so she started to back against the wall. Just before she'd cornered herself, a little blue blur shot out from behind her and fluttered up toward the ceiling, shrieking incessantly and making the Houndoom bark even louder. The commotion attracted some of my parents' other Pokemon, who crowded into the front hall to see what was happening. When they saw Peanut Wing flying in circles around the ceiling lamp, they all tried to get it down, but nothing seemed to affect it. It blew away Mom's Vileplume's stun spore with its wings, which instead of paralyzing and thankfully shutting up ended up paralyzing and thankfully shutting up Dad's Houndoom. It was completely unaffected by Dad's Gengar's mean look, and it kept dodging Mom's Donphan's rollout at the last second. After half an hour of trying, most of the household Pokemon were incapacitated in some way, usually by one of Vileplume's various powders, and Peanut Wing was still flapping around my ceiling lamp unscathed. My parents had come down at this. Oh. Just a heads up, ads will be starting in 5 minutes, and it's recommended you can turn your volume down slightly. After half an hour of trying, most of the household Pokemon were incapacitated in some way, usually by one of Vileplume's various powders, and Peanut Wing was still flapping around my ceiling lamp unscathed. My parents had come down at this point. I could hear them looking through the phone book for late-night pest control in the next room. Snow and I were lying next to each other on the carpet, staring up at our little poison poltergeist, wondering what to do. He thought if he dodged, you'd think he was a coward. The voice in my head startled me so badly I jolted off the floor, only to see that Dad's Gothitelle had come down from his usual haunt in the attic to grace us with his presence. You're impressed by the Zubat's ability to dodge, and you're wondering why he never used it before. It's because he thought he'd be a coward if he avoided Snow's attacks, the gangly Pokemon clarified. He didn't want you to think he was afraid to take a hit. He wants you to know that. I thought this nonsense would end sooner if I answered the Zubat personally, so I answered aloud. I don't think you're a coward, Peanut Wing, but I still don't want to train you. Dad's Gothitelle had been staring at me this entire time with his usual blank expression. Now, his eyes were narrowed. You don't like it because you want something better, his mental voice hissed. You think what makes a Pokemon valuable is what species it is, or what moves it knows. This Zubat likes you enough that he followed you home by clinging to your Mareep and shocking himself with every step she took. He avoided dozens of attacks from much stronger Pokemon so he could make sure you were okay, and he's been flying in circles around a lamp for ages just to stay close to you, because even though you've been rude and callous, he still wants to be your Pokemon. I could feel the Gothitelle's fury stinging me, making me guilty and bringing tears to my eyes. Snow noticed this and headbutted my back gently. Mar. I looked down at her. She was giving me the look she wears when I'm too tired to finish the bedtime story. I have never been able to resist that look. Really? I hiccuped through the tears. You want me to catch him too? She bobbed her head before nuzzling my hand. My dad, his Pokemon, my Pokemon. All of them wanted me to catch this silly little Zubat. Didn't I get a say in who I caught? Wasn't I supposed to be the one who chose my team? I sobbed as I thought that last part. It was like they didn't even care what I wanted when this was supposed to be my first capture. Perhaps I was a bit too harsh before. The Gothitelle's voice was back in my head, sounding less angry this time. I kept sniffling. I get angry when trainers don't want Pokemon who want them, because I was one of those Pokemon who wanted a trainer, but no one wanted to train. Boys thought I looked like a girl, and girls didn't like that I was a boy, and everyone thought I looked creepy, so no one ever bothered with me until your father came along. He heard me when I asked to be captured, and even though his classmates made fun of him for it, he caught me and trained me with the rest of his Pokemon. I was so grateful that I poured every ounce of myself into being stronger for him, and soon the kids who were making fun of your father for being willing to train a freaky boy were apologizing for misjudging us and asking if I would be willing to be traded for this or that prized Pokemon of theirs. Those trainers didn't understand that the thing that made me strong, that gratitude toward and love of the only human who'd ever given me a chance, isn't something that can be traded for, nor can it be bought nor stolen. It has to be given, and it has to be earned. That Zubat is giving you a chance to have a Pokemon that loves you from the start, and who will love you until the end, all because you chose him. Don't turn that down. You won't get another chance. I looked up at the Zubat still flying around my ceiling. He hadn't slowed down in all that time, and he still wasn't even scratched. Maybe he was stronger than I thought. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. I walked over to where I'd dropped my backpack and rummaged through it until I'd found the Pokeball I'd been saving since I turned 7. I'd been told to use it on someone special, because there were no backsies on a first capture. There would be no backsies on Peanut Wing. I gulped and tried not to sound too scared. Hey, Peanut Wing, I think I should train you. I held out the Pokeball and scrunched my eyes shut. There was an immediate whump, and the ball clicked closed without so much as a wiggle. To this day, I'm still not sure whether Peanut, he apparently liked the name, actually counts as my first capture. He kind of captured himself. Also, yes, I was made fun of for catching a Zubat, but not for very long. After Peanut confused some kids who'd insulted me into drawing on the walls and putting glue on the chairs, everybody mysteriously stopped caring about my taste in first captures. I learned a lot about battling from Peanut. Snow had always been able to attack or stall or stun as needed, so my first few years of training never had any specific strategy. But Peanut would faint if you so much as looked at him funny. So whenever I battled with him, we only had one choice of strategy: don't get hit. It worked great in the beginning, but some of my classmates started to wise up to Peanut's tactics, and soon enough Peanut was fainting from an Eevee Swift or a Talos aerial ace, and we had to find ways to dodge the undodgeable, which turned out to be an uncommanded double team to make a single copy, then hiding out of sight while the Swift or aerial ace or feint attack never failed to miss the target the opponent was aiming for. Peanut evolved into a Golbat on the day I lost my glasses. It was one of those summer days when the Ponyta were panting and I was enjoying some much-needed pool time with my Pokemon. Peanut was basking in a mini pool I'd formed with my cupped hands, and Snow was off sulking in the shade, jealous that she couldn't join the fun. We stayed like this until the sun started to set, then we packed up our things and headed home. We were halfway back when I realized I'd forgotten my glasses. I was going to camp the next day, and we were leaving before the pool opened for the next morning. So I told my mom, and she turned the car around as fast as possible, and all but shoved me out the door in the hopes that we could get there before dark. Snow, Peanut, and I headed over to the pool, and snuck over the gates since it was already closed, to check the ledge where I'd last seen them. They weren't there. We went into the bathrooms and checked the lost and found. They weren't in either gender's box, but Peanut did find a pair of goggles that he insisted on wearing despite having no eyes. They were too big for him and kept slipping upside down, which kind of made him look like he had a mouth like a whalmer. After checking every spot we could think of and a few we couldn't, we returned to the poolside to check the edge one last time. It had gotten dark in the time since we'd gone inside, so Snow lit up her tail and held it over the ledge. And that's when we saw something small and dark lying at the bottom of the pool. Snow can't get in the water because every time she so much as puts a hoof in, she shocks everything within 100 yards. There was no one in the pool, but the aforementioned shocking problem meant that Snow had never learned how to swim, so she couldn't go in anyway. I can go in water, and I can swim, but ever since I stayed up late watching a documentary on the depths of the ocean and saw a huntail lunge out at the camera, I've been terrified of swimming in dark or deep water. Even Snow's light wouldn't be enough to coax me down there. That left Peanut, the blind Zubat, who could only see with echolocation, which, when used at the bottom of the pool, was not the best idea. As I pondered how to quickly teach Snow to swim, I realized there was actually one other option. My mom owned a dugong that she'd brought with her to enjoy the pool. I could go and ask to borrow her, and she could get my glasses for us. That was the smart choice. I turned to go do this, and when I heard a faint splash, Mr. I love my trainer so much I'll hurt myself getting her spectacles had decided to try finding my glasses blind and under 8 feet of water. I yelled at Snow to go get Mom, and she bounded off as fast as her little flaffy legs could carry her. Without Snow's light or my glasses, I could barely see anything. I didn't know what to do. There were no lifeguards. I could hear Snow bleeding in the same way she did when she got her head stuck between the railings, which meant she couldn't get my mom, and even if I could get myself to swim down into the water, I might not be able to find Peanut before it was too late. I was alone. I had no idea what to do, and I was basically blind. Then suddenly, I wasn't. There was a glowing blob at the bottom of the pool. It was slowly getting bigger and becoming less blobby. It hunched down toward the pool tiles for a moment before shooting up and solidified into a larger, mouthier Peanut with my glasses in his claws. His now just the right size goggles over his newly formed eyes, and either oxygen deprivation, a huge grin, or both all over his face. Peanut flapped over to me and, with a delicacy I wouldn't have thought he'd have mastered yet, gently dropped my glasses into my hands. We walked back to the car. Peanut hit a tree. He was still getting used to navigating with both eyes and echolocation. Disentangled Snow from the locked gate where she'd gotten stuck, hopped back over with an expert assist from Peanut's larger wings, explained everything to my now very concerned mother and exponentially more concerned dugong, and, after checking for forgotten items one last time, drove home. 2 days passed before I realized I'd left my favorite swimsuit at the pool. Peanut spent 2 years as a Zubat, but only 2 weeks as a Golbat. We were at camp and enjoying ourselves doing camp things, especially meeting new people. Well, I was only especially enjoying meeting Xander, the kid who ran the radio station with his Voltorb and Chatot, who had eyes darker than a deerling's and a smile wider than Peanut's. Snow enjoyed his Pokemon's company as much as I enjoyed his. So together, she and I spent a lot of time running around the camp, asking what songs people wanted to hear and ferrying their requests to Xander at the station. Peanut definitely could have cared less about Xander. Ever since he'd gone down to the deep end to get my glasses, he hadn't taken off those ratty goggles and seemed to want to spend every available moment swimming and showing off. If I wanted to go to the radio station, he'd tug my arm toward the swimming pool in the opposite direction. If Xander was around, he'd tug even harder. The one time I managed to drag him to the station with me, he wouldn't stop screeching. Xander's voice was completely drowned out when he was supposed to be doing some announcements, and the camp thought Peanut's shrieking was some uber-violent screamo song, which Xander got in trouble for playing music that was age inappropriate. I told Peanut we should spend some time apart after that, and he swam in the pool while I hung out in the radio station with Snow until the last day of camp. When it was time to leave, I gathered up my belongings and went to retrieve Peanut from the pool. Xander came out of his cabin, and as Snow and I walked by and offered his hand to me, I held it all the way down to the pool. I dragged Peanut flapping and shrieking from the water, went to make sure my counselor's machoke had put all of my things in the same pile, and spent the rest of the time waiting for my parents leaning against Xander's side, his hand wrapped around my shoulder. My parents came and we left, and I waved goodbye to Xander with misty eyes as we drove off. My parents chuckled over how adorable I was being. Snow hugged me the whole way home, and Peanut just stared out the window, his short ears pressed flat against his head. Even though he was trying to ignore me, I know he could hear me crying silently. Once I was back in my house, I holed myself up in my room with Snow. We hugged each other and cried over Xander, me because I missed him so much, her because she knew I missed him, and I think she might have had a bit of a crush on the Voltorb. Peanut went to swim in the sink. I'd reached that point where I was tired from crying, and I felt a light weight on my head. Peanut's feet were dry now, and he was staring down at me with concern. "At least the other boy in my life is still here," I croaked. "You'll stay with me, right? Even though I was mean to you?" Upon hearing this, Peanut broke into his widest grin and bent down to upside down nuzzle my nose. I sniffled a bit and couldn't help smiling. I was knee-deep in preteen melodrama, and as far as I was concerned, my world was ending, but I just couldn't help myself. Peanut's smiles were infectious. Then, once he got me smiling, Peanut started to do that staccato shrieking that approximated laughter, which made me laugh too. He shrieked faster, and in my fatigue, I laughed harder and felt better, until finally I was hysterical and ecstatic at the same time, and then Peanut started glowing. This was the first time I'd felt a Pokemon evolve. It was much more ethereal than I'd imagined, like he turned into a mist for a moment. Once that moment was over, my head suddenly felt a lot heavier. I realized this was because there was a huge purple bat monster pressing down on my face, and quickly stopped laughing and started trying to breathe again. And that's the end of chapter 2. Oh, I think I missed a lot. Some big storms and tornadoes. Oh no. I'm glad you're all safe. Ah, super cozy. Thank you. I hope you're enjoying your lurk. Oh, Blanca, welcome in, welcome in. The timer was perfect, exactly 1 minute before ad started. Yes. Thank you, thank you. I hope that was a good chapter. I thought that was really sweet. I liked that. It was a lot more detailed than the first one. I'm a bit sleepy, but I'm doing well. I lost an hour of sleep. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we didn't realize that we'd also lost an hour either. Thank you for the hydrate redeem. I do need it. That was a long chapter actually. Thank you, thank you. One second. It's a little hot in my room. I think I did hear the sound that time. But it wasn't loud. Oh. Aw. What the heck? Okay, let's go ahead and start chapter 3. Chapter 3, Pocket Rooms. Oh wait, I need to make sure I can figure out the difference. Okay, wait. That's the author's note. Okay. Now we'll start chapter 3. Oh, thank you for the head pads, Blanca. Thank you. Chapter 3 Pocket Rooms. After Peanut evolved, I didn't catch anything for a couple of years. That winter, Snow had become an Ampharos, and it took me a while just to adjust to owning two fully evolved Pokemon. They ate so much we ran out of food a few times after they'd each evolved. They were so much stronger that even an accidental tap could leave a bruise, and both of them seemed to have aged years in a day. Snow went from acting like an 8-year-old to a teenager overnight. She would change the channel to watch certain shows because she thought the Pokemon actors were hot. She started to get really moody and would be hurt by silly things that never bothered her before, and her normal absent-mindedness had been turned up to 11. Peanut, meanwhile, had gone from being a child to a full-on adult in a matter of weeks. He stopped wanting to play as much, though he remained ever ready to show off, and he seemed less invested in the fantasy stories I'd read to everyone before bedtime. But the worst part was their new sizes. Snow had gone from being no higher than my hip to being 10 centimeters taller than me in a span of a few nauseous seconds. After that, her growth slowed to a couple centimeters a year, which meant she was always taller than me no matter how big a growth spurt I had. Peanut was no better. He'd gone from having a body the size of a toaster with a wingspan that was on par with most doorways, to having a body the size of a child's wagon and a wingspan that wouldn't fit diagonally through a set of double doors with an extra high frame. His head was so big that shortly after evolving, the goggles he'd been wearing had snapped, and he'd spent the following weeks covering his face with his wings like he was afraid to view the world with naked eyes. Furthermore, my parents and I did some research on Crobat and found that, unlike Zubat and Golbat, Crobat have indeterminate growth. The largest one ever recorded had the body the size of a sofa and a wingspan wider than a house when he died. Once we found that out, Mom immediately made an appointment with a flying type specialist to talk about how to deal with Peanut's size. The expert told us that, being a domestic evolution along the lines of Gengar and Lopunny, Peanut's size would be determined by both by how much he ate and how much he's cared for by his trainer. I shouldn't start neglecting him for fear he might get bigger. That would only make him needy and destructive. But a diet and exercise were necessary. Minimal sweets, low-calorie foods that were high in fiber to make his body work better to get the same energy, and training to carry a person in flight would all be important if I wanted Peanut to grow slowly. She also highly recommended we get a pocket room. We told her we had one, so she recommended an upgrade. The pocket room was a little box that sat on the kitchen counter. When the box was opened, the person or Pokemon doing so would be warped inside a holographic room that would create the impression of anything but the substances of nothing. Everybody used it for different things. Snow and I used it to play, imagining magical cities and exotic jungles, and going on adventures to find the lost crystal of wherever to tame an ancient legendary Pokemon. My sister used it to figure out which outfit she would wear without having to try everything on. She'd just imagine wearing the clothes and she could see what they would look like. My parents used it to go on virtual vacations. Dads were always ski trips and mountain climbing, while Mom would visit all the wonders of the modern and ancient world in that room. But nobody used or needed the room as much as the Pokemon did. Pocket rooms create an illusion of being in a much larger area than one actually is, so the faster, bigger, and bulkier Pokemon would use it to stretch their legs and play around without the destruction that would come from doing that in any other part of the house. Mom's dugong would imagine an ocean and swim for hours on end. Her Luxray created thunderous plains where she'd race the lightning bolts. Dad's Houndoom made entire forests where she promptly burnt to cinders. And his Avalug practiced the delicate art of iceberg architecture. Their Noctowl and Altaria would go in together and hold flying races from dawn until dusk, and then all through the night. Upgrading a pocket room wasn't exactly cheap, but it was definitely cheaper than replacing all of the furniture if Peanut got restless and broke everything. And besides, we probably needed an upgrade anyway. Our model was reliable, but everybody could tell it was getting old. Peanut, with his huge size and fast wing beats, desperately needed a processing upgrade that could allow the room to accommodate such a massive and fast Pokemon who was only going to get more massive and faster as time went on. My parents and Dad's Avalug wanted a better graphics card, so the leaves in the trees, the bricks in the buildings, and the snow in the sky could all feel more realistic. Snow and I wanted better sound processing. Everything always sounded somewhat tinny in the old room, and my sister and her Mienfu wanted a better case for the outside of the room. The old color clashed with the kitchen and had been driving them both crazy. We ended up getting all of it, plus an alarm that would attract the user to problems in the outside world, and a subdividing feature, which meant that multiple users could be in the room at the same time doing different things. The price was much higher than we'd been expecting. To cover the cost, all the humans agreed to not eat at restaurants, and all the Pokemon agreed to subcontract themselves for a month. This was Snow and Peanut's first time working with the recruiters, so we had to get them certified and licensed. Our family's recruiters were a gregarious man named Arnold and his Metachamp. Their job was to put an employer in contact with Pokemon who could do whatever job was required, and then make sure the job was done well, and the Pokemon were paid what they were promised. They were also in charge of running the certification and renewal exams, which made sure the Pokemon were capable of performing the task in question. They liked to work 2-on-2 with the trainer and one Pokemon at a time. Snow went first. Oh, you're both getting AP. I guess that means I'm doing a good job. Yay! Yeah, this story has 23 chapters, so I don't know if we'll get through the entire thing tonight. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I also have another one. It's just Pokedex and it's short lore entries, so maybe I'll do a little bit of both. You're doing amazing. Ah, thank you. I had a really good ASMR teacher. hmm Hello, hello, Peck. I saw you earlier. How are you doing? I really liked in that last chapter. I really liked that they talked about how Crobat just kind of grows and grows. I like the idea of the box too. That thank you for the head pets. I really liked the idea of the box and how the Pokemon can essentially have a larger space to fulfill their needs. That's really cool. I think if we had the technology, that would be really cool to have in real life as well. Ah, congratulations on the Fizzly Pickly. Just eating dinner right now because I was too lazy. Ah, that's good. That's good. What are you having for dinner, Blanca? Gonna take another sip. Or maybe I need a sip on water because do you want a gummy mango? Oh, no, thank you. Maybe after stream. Thank you, honey. Oh, you're eating pizza right now. That sounds delicious. Wait a minute. I'm taking a slightly longer break so my voice can catch back up a bit. The last few chapters have been pretty long. What toppings do you have on your pizza? How many words is the story? 33,838. I need to check something real quick. Oh, how odd. We, someone subscribed, but I'm not able to find out who. Well, whoever subscribed, thank you very much. I'm sorry I'm not able to thank you properly, though. So it can take up to 260 minutes to read all of that. Oh. Oh, wow. Yeah, I think I'll probably stick to this for another hour and then we'll switch over to the Pokedex. How's that sound? Sounds good. Is good. It's just pepperoni pizza because I'm basic. No, that's not a bad thing at all. I love pepperoni pizza. Okay, I had to adjust the font for myself. I'm stumbling over a lot of words. Okay, let's go ahead and start the next chapter. Chapter 4 Gloominess and Interviews. We sat next to each other in Arnold and his Metacham's office, me on a chair and Snow on a large beanbag. Three of his walls were sparsely decorated, the olive plant only being interrupted by the occasional picture of his family or hanging spider plant. The fourth wall, though, was decorated with all manner of posters, advertising various jobs and even full-time careers for Pokemon. I tried to point them out to Snow, who looked at them for a few seconds. Before she became more concerned with swinging back and forth on her beanbag chair until she swung too far and fell flat on her face. That was the moment when Arnold and his Medicham entered the office. They both stepped over my fallen Pokemon with the ease of a Sneasel and settled down in their chairs on the other side of his desk. So the last time I saw you two, he pointed at me, were barely up to my knee, and you, he pointed to Snow, were still a Mareep. How time flies, he chuckled. I gave him my best manner smile and tried to subtly kick Snow, who jolted off the floor and back into a sitting position. It's nice to see you both again. You as well. I hear you and he glances at his clipboard. Ms. Snowflake are helping your family make some money. Yeah, we got a new pocket room and everybody's chipping in. Besides, my parents thought that my Pokemon should get certified anyway, so we can start saving some money of our own. Both Arnold and his Medicham smiled as they heard this. That's very wise of them. You all can save up some money for yourselves, and most of the jobs Pokemon do give them a very good workout. I glanced over at Snow. She had moved on to crossing her eyes and looking at her headlight. Snow doesn't need exercise, she just needs to focus. I hissed that last part, which got her attention. She snapped back to the world of the living and apologized for zoning out. Don't worry about it. If I had a headlight as pretty as yours, I'd get distracted by it too. Arnold's Metacham had one of the sweetest mental voices I'd ever heard. Like she'd thank you for a punch in the face or a kick in the leg. Ampharos and other electric types sometimes get spacey when their electricity gets stale. Has this been happening a lot lately? Arnold's speaking voice was almost identical to his Metacham's mental voice. It mostly started after she evolved. I mean, she's always been a little spacey, but after she became an Ampharos, she started zoning out even during things she liked. She made me re-buy tickets to watch How to Train Your Noivern in theaters because she'd forgotten the entire thing. She'd been waiting for that movie for months, and she was on the edge of her seat the entire time. At this, Arnold furrowed his brow. You don't use her power, or you don't use her to power your house? My mom's Luxray powers the entire house on her own. She gets very territorial about it. When was the last time Snow discharged all of her electricity? Snow was finally paying enough attention to participate. She says it was when you fought Anita Reno during gym. How long ago was that? 2 months maybe? I couldn't remember for sure. So, she only ever discharges all of her electricity during a tough battle. Snow nodded. Arnold and the Metacham exchanged glances. Snowflake should be draining all of her electricity at least once a month. Otherwise, it will start to go stale and she'll get forgetful. Breaking my rule for a second. Side note. Honey, is that why you're occasionally very forgetful? Is your electricity getting stale? Apparently so. I've just been diagnosed. Okay, back into the story. He looked at Snow. She was back to rocking on her beanbag chair. Or she'll get more forgetful anyway. If your house is already powered by your mother's Luxray, then you can either drain it all in a battle or set up a regular appointment with an organization that needs her electricity. I recommend the latter because she'll get paid for it, and it just so happens that I work with a massive company that always needs more power. He bent down and emerged a moment later with a sizable file in his hand. Then he opened it up and showed it to me. This is Anderson and White. They make hard drives. They contract all sorts of Pokemon from us. It used to be mostly water types because the computer making process uses fresh water for cooling purposes. But after the cooling process is complete, the water becomes contaminated. They used to just dump it, but people have been complaining about the effect it's had on the ecosystem. So they've been ordered to clean up the harbor they've damaged and establish a program for purifying the water immediately after it's used. Their plan to do this involves a lot of electricity, so they're hiring all the strong electric types they can. If your Snowflake has so much pent-up juice that's making her spacey, she's definitely power enough for this job. What do you think? I agreed immediately, but Snow needed to be reminded as to what we were agreeing about. Once we had relayed it all to her again, she agreed. Arnold's Metacham told me Snow said she wanted to feel more alert again. Then it was Peanut's turn. Arnold initially tried to get Peanut interested in a cleaning job that wanted Crobat to blow accumulated grammar slime off of various pieces of machinery then fly it to the nearest waste disposal station. But upon hearing that Peanut was actually more interested in swimming than flying, offered him a job with the same company as Snow. They needed Pokemon that were able to go underwater, were immune to poison, and were more mobile than Tentacruel or Skrelp to swim around in contaminated waters and clear out the local Pokemon before the area was cordoned off and the electric Pokemon were sent in to zap it. Peanut requested a new pair of goggles. Arnold called the company, who said those could be provided, and gave Peanut the job. Before either of them could get started, however, they both had to go through certification. Snow had to learn basic safety precautions, how to shock herself unconscious if she was ever unable to stop generating electricity in an emergency, and how to give an even flow of electricity so she wouldn't cause a power surge. Peanut's certification was a bit trickier because he was a poison flying type who was going to do a water type's job. But after some planning and a few phone calls to make sure everything we were doing would result in the right certification, we devised a plan to get Peanut certified as a swimmer-diver. In addition to the usual tests of speed and agility in water, Peanut had to go through breath-holding tests to see how long he could go down at a time, show he could cope with pressure changes in water, learn how to attack underwater, and, of course, prove that he could survive in tainted water. All in all, Snow needed a few days, while Peanut took a week to get certified. Once everything was complete, they were ready to start working. I had known from the instant Arnold said the word harbor that the job my Pokemon were being asked to do was several hours away by plane. My family and I live in the desert, where water types are prized and the streets are wider than the rivers. So when I asked Arnold how long my Pokemon would be away and when I could see them again, I was surprised to learn that the Pokeball transfer system had made it possible for a Pokemon in California to work an afternoon in Maine and be back in time for dinner. They were even working on expanding the system internationally, so Pokemon could work in Mumbai in the morning, Leipzig in the afternoon, and pop by Antarctica before heading home to Mexico City in the evening. For the next few weeks, things settled into a routine. We all woke up, ate breakfast, then the humans went to school and work, while the Pokemon were transferred via computer to various corners of the country for their jobs. In the evenings, the humans would return and wait by the computer for the Pokemon to be sent back. Once everybody had all of their Pokeballs, the Pokemon were released, and everyone ate dinner before heading back to their various responsibilities. Snow was doing much better. Her zoning out was back down to what I considered to be healthy levels. She even seemed more energetic, insisting that we play Zap Catch, which is where I throw a frisbee and Snow zaps it until it's magnetized, then puts the opposite charge into her front hooves so she can make the frisbee change course and catch it. Together, before I did my homework each night. Peanut, too, seemed happier. He now had custom-made deep water goggles courtesy of his job. The company provided them for free since Arnold had made the argument that they were a necessary work expense. And he would sometimes drag me into the pocket room, then imagine it full of water and show off how fast he could swim or how accurately he could swing an air slash from 100 meters underwater. That all changed when Peanut came home one day and was unusually listless. He was uninterested in doing the things that usually made him happy. Promises of watching documentaries about the deep sea, getting his back scratched, and being allowed to show off in the pocket room all failed to get any sort of reaction beyond a murmured Crobat and a shaking head. I asked Snow if she knew what was bothering him, but she just shrugged her shoulders and said, "Ampharos am," in a tone that meant she was just as confused as I was. When dinner time came, and Peanut didn't want to eat, though, I started to get really worried. Ever since the flying type specialist had told him to go on a diet, Peanut was always hungry. I'd tried to do everything I could to make it easier on him. We fed him rindo berries in the hope that they would make him feel fuller without giving him as many calories. I gave him ango berries for snacks in the hopes they would suppress his appetite. I even snuck him my leftovers a few times, but none of it was ever enough. I knew he tried to hide it. I could see the muscles tense under his fur when he ate as he tried to keep himself from swallowing it whole, and twice I had caught him in the pocket room at late hours, gorging on holographic sweets just to feel like he could be full. If something was keeping him from wanting to eat, then it had to be very, very serious. I tried asking what was wrong. He replied with yet another disinterested crowbat. I tried tickling him. Still didn't work. I tried asking Snow to ask. He answered her with a series of crows and bats. But when I tried to ask her what he said, she tried and failed several times before tapping her hoof to her face in her gesture of, I give up. This problem was clearly too complicated to communicate with tones and gestures. I needed a translator. And that's the end of chapter 4. Knock knock, I am the Rat Boy Genius. I just came over to say hi. Hello, welcome in, welcome in. I hope you enjoy your stay here. I wonder what's going on with Crobat. That was a pretty sad chapter, actually. Also, it says there was no new sub. I think glitch. Yeah, that's happened before. Well. Okay. Let's go ahead and start chapter 5. Chapter 5. Serena. No, Dad's Gothitelle thought at me. I spent all day doing that, and I want a break. Oh, come on, Eric, please. It's for Peanut. You love Peanut. Everyone loves Peanut, Eric quipped. That doesn't mean I'm any less exhausted. I'll bring you cookies, I offered in a sing-song voice. Those black and white ones I know you like. No amount of sweets will sway me, goddaughter. I want nothing more than to be left alone with my thoughts right now. That last part gave me an idea, a horribly devious, grievous idea. If you won't help me understand why Peanut is so sad, I'll start singing that song from the steakhouse commercial. I'll get it stuck in everybody's head, and then, even if you go as far away as possible, you'll never be able to get it out of yours. At this, the Gothitelle's emotionless face showed a sliver of fear, then anger, then resignation, and then it was back to the usual emotionless wall. Fine. I'll help you figure out what's making Peanut so sad. But if I hear so much as a note of that accursed jingle, I'll give you nightmares for a week. Deal, I said, and we walked down to where I'd last seen Peanut moping. He's preoccupied, Eric told me, and turned around to leave. I held out my arm to stop him. Everyone with eyes knows that. Tell me what he's thinking. That breaches so many levels of ethics as well as several laws. Fine, Mr. Smarty Dress. Just ask him what he wants to tell me. Is that ethical and legal enough for you? He grumbled, before locking eyes with Peanut for a few minutes. He says he made a friend. I groaned. He's been all mopey because he made a friend? How does that even work? He says the friend is a wild Pokemon who wants a trainer. She's asked the humans working nearby, but they're all adults with full teams. All the kids she's asked don't want her, and when the harbor cleaning project finishes, she's going to be forced away from the places where humans live. She's going to be forced away from the places where humans live by all the Pokemon repopulating the area, so she's worried she's running out of chances. Well, that at least made some sense. More than moping over making a new friend, anyway. I started talking directly to Peanut. I don't want to promise anything, because I still haven't been able to choose any of my own Pokemon. But what if I talk to her? If I like her, I'll catch her. And if I don't, I'll try and help her find someone who does, okay? Peanut brightened at this. He nodded empathetically. I'd always wanted a water Pokemon, but they were so rare where I lived, and most of the ones that wanted to be caught were snapped up as soon as they made that decision. But the fact that no one seemed to want her was holding me back. Was it just because they were coastal people who could catch water types easily? Or was there something else wrong with this friend of Peanut's? I decided to probe a bit, while I still had my dad's Gothitelle to translate. What's she like? I asked. This prompted a series of happy chirps and whistles from Peanut, which Eric later translated. He says she's kind and considerate, and she loves sunlight, and she's always wanted to know more about humans. And she's tough. She can survive in waters where even Drogalgi won't swim. And, he paused briefly, she's beautiful. Now, if you don't mind, I've held up my end of our bargain, so I'm going back to the attic before Peanuts starts composing poetry for his watery love. Ciao. And with that, he flowed back up the stairs and out of sight. We started to plan out how I was going to meet Peanut's friend. Snow and Peanut would keep working after the month deadline passed, both to keep tabs on the friend and to save the extra for our trip. Meanwhile, Peanut and I would get our flyers licenses, and we would fly to South Padre, Texas, where the cleaning was taking place. Once we got there, I'd rent a room at a hotel and a psychic translator, and Snow and Peanut would go sightseeing after Peanut introduced me to his crush. The two of us would talk alone, and if we both felt we were a good match, I would catch her, and we would all spend a few days at the beach before flying home. If I didn't like this mysterious Pokemon, we'd contact a local placement agency and see if there were any matches nearby, and I'd go to the non-contaminated part of the beach and find someone who was willing to be my souvenir. Getting the flyer's license wasn't actually too hard since, for once, Peanut's size was an asset. He was big enough to carry me easily, but not so big that I couldn't get a grip. Instead of a saddle, we settled for the cheaper and more waterproof option of putting handles on Peanut's goggle strap and a nylon belt with footholds around his waist. We used this method for the test, passed, and each got our licenses. Now all we had to do was save money and bide our time until spring break. Once the last bell rang for class, I bolted out the door faster than any of my other classmates. My mom was waiting in her car outside. I threw my bags in the back, grabbed Peanut's belt from its perch on the dry cleaning hook, gave her a hug, and said goodbye for the week. My parents knew about the plan and agreed on 3 conditions. First, I had to keep studying and couldn't spend all of my time planning in the time leading up to spring break. Second, I had to check in with them every 3 hours, unless it was some ungodly hour of the night in which they wanted to know the names of the hotels I stayed at. Finally, everybody had to be microchipped. My parents wanted to be sure that if there was a problem, they knew which police force to contact and where to send them. Since these terms were pretty lenient, especially considering that I was 11 at the time, we'd all agreed to them, and in return, my parents gave me some extra money and supplies. asked me to take pictures, and let me take off straight from the end of school. I recalled Snow, saddled Peanut, and, with a wing beat and a gust of wind, we were off. As we rocketed through the sky, I made a mental note to always wear a parachute and goggles when riding Peanut. I mean, everybody knew he was fast. That was why we needed the upgraded pocket room in the first place. But jeez, Peanut was shooting through the sky like a bullet. By the time we stopped for dinner, we'd already reached the Texan border, and just after the sun had gone down, we made it to South Padre. We found the hotel I'd made a reservation at, a lovely place with an endless pool and a great view of the island, and checked into our room. As a special treat to celebrate our vacation, we ordered dessert from room service. Snow had a piece of pineapple upside-down cake, I had the lemon bar, and I let Peanut have 2 hot fudge sundaes, extra nuts. Any Pokemon that can cut out a trip to the airport and still beat the plane has earned some slack from his diet. Once we'd finished our treats and gotten ready for bed, I pulled down the covers on the bed and we piled in together. All of us fell asleep immediately. I awoke the next morning to the familiar feeling of being suffocated by purple. Peanut had found that sitting on my head was a reliable way to wake me up. Meanwhile, I had found that pulling his ear was a reliable way to get him off my face, so I reached up until I found one of his purple tufts and tugged it until Peanut let out a whine and rolled off of me. All while Snow and I were getting ready, Peanut looked like he was going to start ricocheting off the walls as soon as we were presentable and sufficiently covered in sunblock. Peanut was pushing us out the door and down the street. As I was being reverse led to our destination, I pulled out my phone and dialed the number for the local psychic translator hotline. The receptionist answered with a cheery drawl and asked what we needed. I explained our predicament, and she told us to wait at the nearest intersection. We did, and a few moments later a Kadabra appeared and explained that his name was Stu and that it would be our translator for the day. He had barely finished his sentence when Peanut added him to the push pile, headed toward the docks. The purification section was really just some Pokemon insulating curtains that made it so that only evacuated portions of the harbor would be electrified. There some water types swimming around, making sure wild Pokemon didn't enter the dangerous sections of the bay, some psychic and steel types standing on the docks, who seemed to be responsible for summoning the constant influx of dark and dirty water into the harbor, and, of course, there were dozens of electric types, who were each channeling streams of electricity into the cordoned-off sections of water. Peanut shuffled over to a dirty, rancid-smelling corner of the harbor, and when he'd reached the edge, dunked his head under. A few seconds later, a small, brown, and unbelievably shabby fish poked its head out of the water. Once Peanut had confirmed that yes, this little brown thing was indeed his friend, Snow pretended to be really interested in a particularly colorful hang glider off in the distance and dragged Peanut over to go and look with her. I gave them both some pocket money to buy a souvenir. Stu and I remained to talk to the little fish. With Stu translating, I found out that the little fish was called a Feebas. Like the fairy tale, the ugly Magikarp, I asked. The Feebas said she didn't know, but Stu personally clarified that yes, she was the same species. The pages from my storybook started to flood back to me. An ugly, drab little fish that none of the Magikarp liked because it looked dirty and sick, who traveled around being rejected and or terrified by everyone he met. He ended up living in solitude until one day he saw a group of Milotic and decided that it would be better to possibly be killed by a thing of beauty than to continue his miserable existence. He begged to join them and was surprised when they accepted. He asked why, and they said that he was one of them. The instant he was accepted for who he was, he evolved into a Milotic himself, and no one ever called him ugly again. Back when I was still in my princess phase, I'd stared at that picture of the Milotic for hours on end. The illustration painted them as having scales that could shine like a rainbow and eyes that reflected the beauty of all they saw. And if what I'd heard from the announcers on the competitive battles was correct, Milotic were a force to be reckoned with on the battlefield. Whenever it looked like the chips were down and the next hit would win, the Milotic scales would start glowing of their own accord. And it was like they were suddenly made of diamond. The same moves that had brought them to the edge of fainting suddenly seemed useless. Such a Pokemon was invaluable, even if it meant I had to put up with its unusual appearance for a bit. It would all be worth it in the end. Stu read my mind before I could say anything and told the Feebas I wanted to train her. She jumped out of the water and in what I think was a display of happiness, I pulled out the Pokeball I'd brought just in case and caught her. Then I paid Stu, who thanked me before teleporting away, and went off to find Snow and Peanut. I finally tracked them to a Mexican buffet where they were stuffing their faces with tamales and enchiladas. I should have scolded Miss I don't have an immune system and Mr. I grow 3 inches from eating a piece of pie for spending their money on food, and then I realized I hadn't told them not to buy lunch and it was lunchtime, so I decided to let it slide. After all, Snow only got sick when she ate food that other people or Pokemon had already bitten, and Peanut had just gotten me a soon-to-be Milotic, so I figured they could indulge a little more on this vacation. I went up to the front and bought 2 more plates, one for myself and one for the Feebas. A waiter came by with a fishbowl seat, and I filled our plates, mine with mostly tacos and guacamole, and the Feebas with a little bit of everything. I put bits of food into the Feebas's fishbowl a little at a time, and we devised a system to get an idea of what she liked. She'd rise up a little if it was good, and sink a little if she didn't like it. Through this system, I learned that this particular Feebas ate just about every sort of vegetable, starch, and legume we could find, but seemed to dislike meat in all its forms. Once she stopped eating the food, I dropped her bowl, indicating that she was done. I tried to brainstorm names for my new catch. I wrote a list of possibilities and read them to my 3 Pokemon. Snow was most in favor of the name Ariel, while Peanut seemed to prefer Bianca. Feebas didn't seem to react to either. I tried Michelle, Adelaide, Cora, Yvonne, and Katrina to no avail. My Feebas seemed equally indifferent to everything I suggested. After failing to find a match with mythological creatures, Disney characters, and celebrity names, I finally suggested the name Serena. Which the Feebas seemed to like. Not gonna lie, I was a little weirded out by that. Serena was my great-grandmother's name, and it had almost been mine. Giving it to a Pokemon felt like I was giving up some part of myself in the process. Then I remembered that the Feebas in my story had evolved when he was accepted by others, and decided to let Serena have the name she wanted. It would probably stop feeling weird after a little while. We spent the rest of the vacation enjoying the beach. Peanut only got out of the water when it was time to eat or go to bed. Whenever he left, I could see dozens of heads pop out of the water to see him off. Snow coped with her inability to go into the ocean by building sandcastles. She started out with simple bucket piles, but by the end of the week she was making, well, sandcastles. She'd even hollow them out and let wild Krabby hide in them. Meanwhile, Serena and I spent the week wading in the shallows. I'd watch her swim circles around my legs and marvel at how her sandy-colored scales would blend into the ocean floor. Occasionally, she'd dart off into deeper waters and return with a sand dollar or a piece of seaweed in her mouth for me to see. Whenever other water Pokemon swam nearby, though, she'd swim behind me and hide until they left. There was a nice tailwind on our last day, so we made it home after only a couple hours of flying. My parents were ecstatic to hear that I'd caught a water Pokemon, promptly made appointments with the vet to make sure Serena was healthy and microchipped, and took a trip to the supply store to pick out a decent fish bowl for her so she could sleep in my room if she chose. Yay! That was a cute chapter. That's cute that Peanut the Crowbat had a crush on Serena the Feebass. And now they get to be together. Oh yes, ads in 1 minute. So cute. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Okay. Um I think I think 5 chapters is good, you know? So I think we'll change gears and we'll read some from Pokedex by Bird Boy. Yay. These are much shorter, so I'll probably read a few chapters and then take these breaks in between those. There's 988 because that's a lot of Pokemon. Uh, there's 282,541 total words. Oh my god. Yeah. I don't think we're going to be reading all of this in one night. But I think it'll be cooler to just read a few. I do need a sip of water though. I hope everyone's having a cozy time so far. Yay! Okay, let's start. Number 1, Bulbasaur. Like other starting Pokemon, Bulbasaur are extinct in the wild. They are the only one of the Kanto starters which was hunted to extinction. It is feared that, as only a select few skillful breeders have managed to induce Bulbasaur to mate, and as the population has dropped to dangerously low levels, they will join the ranks of Aerodactyl and Ammonite within the century. This is primarily due to a legend that states if a Bulbasaur's bulb is removed, the Bulbasaur will die, but the bulb will continue to bloom, and in a decade's time produce a potion, which can halt aging for yet another decade. This legend has been debunked by the scientific community, and only the most traditional, superstitious folk the most learned researchers believe it today. Professor Oak of Pallet Town is far older than anyone knows. I know I said I wasn't gonna stop after every chapter, but what the heck? Uh, we started off so dark. Yeah, I didn't expect that. Maybe I should have. I mean, dang. Just kind of glancing through the next one. Yeah, I think we're in for some darker stories this time. Or lore, darker lore. Okay. Number 2, Ivysaur. Although modern man worships the legendaries, Arceus, or no gods at all, primitive man commonly worshipped gods modeled on other Pokemon, most commonly Ivysaur. Some say this is because its blossoming flower represents adolescence, or because it unifies plant and animal in a single symbiotic form, or because its vines were seen as symbols of fertility. All of this is true, but in reality, Ivysaur were worshipped primarily because the plant on its back, in addition to stun spore, poison powder, and sleep powder, can spray a powerful hallucinogen which causes man to have mystical experiences. It is no coincidence that many prophets have had an Ivysaur in their lineup, and to this day, they are commonly used in mystery religions and initiation rites, but not just among man. The mysterious garden where Bulbasaur evolved is filled with this unique Ivysaur spray. I I kind of feel like I'm reading about yokai. Like my wife does that, and this is feeling a bit similar. It's dark. Hoo hoo hoo. Is good. Number 3, Venusaur. Of the 31 Pokemon who learn Solar Beam naturally, Venusaur is the only one who can also transfer energy to others, albeit only its fellow grass types. This has made it a subject of intense interest for scientific research into solar power to solve the impending energy crisis. Electricity has traditionally been generated by electric type Pokemon, but the increased electricity needs of the modern technological revolution have made them insufficient. Gone are the days when a Pikachu hooked up to a generator can meet a whole skyscraper's energy needs, and the fossil fuels used as a stopgap measure have been running out. The sun, however, has a supply of energy so vast to seem infinite, and already the solar beam TM has been synthesized from Venusaur's flower. There is hope that with further research, its DNA will unlock the secret of solar energy, if they don't go extinct first. Number 4, Charmander. In the late Pleistocene and early Holocene, a period known to laymen as the dawn of mankind, Charmander abounded in a desert east of Fuchsia City. They used their flames to hunt bug and grass Pokemon, and were as abundant in this land as Zubat and Tentacool are in theirs, and dug surprisingly sturdy burrows to protect themselves during infrequent storms. It was climate change that did them in. Kanto is far wetter than it once was, and those few Charmander who tried to adapt to growing forests failed. Leaves were a poor shield, and there were no forests in Kanto with a thick enough canopy to prevent rainfall. In Kanto's Warring States era, the last patch of desert was converted into pasture by a local warlord, and the wild Charmander became extinct. Not all was lost, however, for man is a species which builds shelters and loves fire, and before they learned to rub sticks together, they domesticated the Charmander, both for its valuable flames and its role in eating disease-carrying insects. In modern times, they are still a fairly common household pet, although never as numerous as they were before the invention of the matchbox. I don't know how my wife reads about yokai. This is feeling very similar, and it's so sad. Is good. Number 5, Charmeleon. The blood of a charmeleon is over 300 degrees Fahrenheit and must be handled with special protective equipment lest it cause dangerous burns. This is not, however, an uncommon temperature for the blood of a fire-type Pokemon. Indeed, quite a few burn even hotter. What makes their blood notable is how often they shed it. They are a species of Pokemon in an adolescence of evolution with far more courage than brains, and rare is the city which cannot count a Charmeleon who heroically died to save its people. Many of these Charmeleon, however, would probably have survived if they shouted less during combat and learned the value of self-preservation, even if only to carry on the cause. It is from this species of flaming warrior Pokemon that the term hot-blooded has entered the Galarian language to describe those who attempt to use passion and shouting and courage to overcome the impossible. Few of them ever succeed, but most become heroes just for trying. Number 6. Charizard. Some have speculated that in a world where Charmeleon was the end of its evolutionary line, firebombing as a weapon of war would not have been developed until the invention of airships and airplanes. Unfortunately for many of their victims, those who have seen homes burned, crops ruined, and been scorched alive, Charmeleon evolve into Charizard. And although their extreme weakness to any competent rock-type Pokemon has kept them away from the massive battles of ages past, Charizard cores have continued to be used throughout the centuries to give people who resisted in spite of broken armies a bitter choice between surrender or massacre in flames. Today, war is rare and intentional law prohibits the use of Charizard against civilian populations. The only flock of Charizard left is a small migratory order centered around 2 secret training valleys, one each for summer and winter. And yet whenever they take to the skies on their majestic semi-annual flights, many of those old enough to have lived through the war find themselves running for their lives or screaming in blind terror. What, what the heck? I thought these would be less dark. Okay. That's why I want to read about them. Dark. That would be better for Halloweeny. I I think it was pretty cool. I want to learn about the Serena the Feebas. I don't have tough skin like you. Okay, so the next chapter in our book is actually a pretty short one. Okay. Also, we've been going for nearly 2 hours, so if you haven't yet, don't forget to do some self-care. Oh, Peck has won 10 points from the jump catch game. Congratulations, Peck. Okay. Chapter 6, Trading. Trading. I feel like I feel like I'm struggling more with reading as we go on. I don't. How do you keep this going, honey? Training Sai was an exercise in patient compassion. Unlike Peanut, who only spent a couple of weeks as a Golbat, Sai didn't evolve into a Milotic until I was 20 and had a full team with everyone else in their final stage. People's responses varied. Some were concerned about Sai's health and self esteem, while others accused me of being a cruel or incompetent trainer. The worst were those who thought she was defective because she wasn't evolving. These people rarely had the decency to wait until she was out of earshot, and every time she overheard them, she would spend the night trying to bury herself in rainbow fishbowl rocks. Peanut would curl himself around her bowl and make purring clicks in an attempt to soothe her, but even if he managed to cheer her up, she always seemed a bit worse for wear. I tried to rationalize my hope that she would evolve soon as concern for my Pokemon's mental state, but somewhere underneath that, I am ashamed to admit I wanted her to be different. I didn't want her personality to change. I'd grown to love my little fish almost as much as Peanut had, but carrying the fishbowl was frustrating and her skin was rough and scratchy, and she couldn't stay out of the water for very long. And, well, she was ugly. I tried so hard not to think of it that way, but it was true. And every time I felt like I was getting better, some numbskull would remind me of it by making a stupid comment. And I knew she could see it in my face that knowing I secretly agreed really hurt her. Maybe I was a bad trainer. Maybe Sai would have uh, maybe Sai would have become a Milotic on her own if I hadn't caught her. Maybe I should ask if she wanted to be traded to someone else who actually knew how to deal with a Feebas without making her self-esteem issues worse. The last one made my chest ache, but I figured I should do it. I owed it to Serena to at least make sure that if I couldn't make her happy, that another trainer could. I got Eric to translate Sai's response. He told me that she loved me and my team, but she was tired of being picked on and worried that her evolution, which was the whole reason she'd wanted a trainer in the first place, would never come. We agreed to look into other options. After a few internet searches, I came across a forum for mutually beneficial trades. Trainers who didn't have the money or space to be able to keep their Pokemon, trainers who wanted to divorce their Pokemon without fully releasing them, and the relatives of deceased trainers whose families couldn't train their teams all went there to find a solution to each other's problems. I found the profile of a man who had a Milotic of his own and messaged him asking if he wanted another one. Thus began my correspondence with Maze for Days, as he called himself. He was a professional trainer with a neurotic Lucario who found his current living situation to be overly stressful, so he was looking for a casual trainer who would treat her like a pet. Everyone felt the trade was fair. Both Pokemon would get what they needed, and both trainers would receive Pokemon of roughly equal value. We began to Skype to arrange specifics. 2 days before one of these Skype dates, both Maze and I had unexpected schedule conflicts. Not wanting to waste all of that planning, we decided we would both leave our Pokemon at home, and they could talk to each other without any pressure from us. When I got home several hours later, after the Skype conversation was scheduled to end, Sai was still floating in front of my computer talking to the Lucario. Snow, who was reading a book on the couch nearby, had attached a charger to her tail to keep the computer from dying, and Peanut had been sleeping on the floor. As I came in, he woke up and looked at me, bleary-eyed. I tried to gingerly make my way through them, but in my nervousness to not interrupt, I tripped over the charger and almost knocked Sai headfirst into Snow's high-voltage tail. Luckily, Peanut's inability to sleep through opening doors had woken him up enough to save Sai's bowl from inverting and electrocuting both my Pokemon and my laptop. Once everything was back in order and the Lucario had signed off, I apologized to Sai for the accident. She was really agitated, splashing around and swimming in circles. I thought it was because she thought my apology was insincere, so I tried again, but she didn't calm down. She kept swimming frantically until I felt a tap on my shoulder and turned to see Snow holding the hand of my mom's scatterbrained Ru- Reuniclus? Runiclus? Jelly. Snow holding the hand of my mom's jelly. Yeah, let's go with that. Okay. Chapter 7 Translators. Look, said Bow Tray Nerd. Water stain wicked. Sai hang read need vest eat volt. Need vest eat volt. I repeatedly pinched the bridge of my nose, then turned to look at Sai. She'd stopped moving as much, and she was floating low in her bowl. Could you try again, Jelly? I'm not sure we understood that. Jelly's face changed for a second, like they were having a brief moment of clarity before hopping back on the train to Nonsense Land. Look, no water tray. Water cane cell. Sai said, hang read. Need vest eat volt. Snow's forehead light bulb was glowing. She said she was thinking as hard as she could to figure out what the unknown Jelly had just said. Peanut had curled into a ball and was rolling back and forth like a supersized scolipede, trying to do the same thing. Sai was lying flat against her bowl, staring up at the ceiling like a stunfisk. She'd only done that once before, when a particularly tactless relative had called her... We're going to skip that word. I could only imagine what it meant now. Unlike Eric, Jelly had consistently failed their interpreter training. They were supposedly brilliant and had an incredible capacity for blocking hits, but there was something bizarre about their mental voice, like they were talking backwards through a pile of coats. Dad had taken his team, my sister's team, with the exception of her Mienshao, and my other 3 Pokemon to the mountains for a training weekend, so Jelly was the only psychic available for the next 2 days. Or rather, he was the only psychic available unless I wanted to shell out the $150 fee to hire a psychic for an hour, which I didn't. After 5 more minutes of trying to translate Jelly's word vomit, I pulled out my wallet and dialed the psychic hotline. Stu, now an alakazam with massive copper spoons, promptly appeared in my living room. He looked just as surprised to see us as we were to see him. Have I gone back in time? You all look the same. Well, not exactly the same. You. He pointed a spoon at Snow. Look more beautiful. And you. He pointed the other spoon at Peanut. Are even bigger than you were when I saw you last. What have you been eating? Miracle seeds? He grows an inch every time I let him have a cookie, I replied. If he ate a miracle seed, he'd be too big for our house. Ah, well then. Best to stay away from those. They give you a horrible growth spurt and leave a nasty taste in your mouth. Now, why is it you called me here after all these years? Remember my Feebas? She hasn't evolved yet, and I'm not sure I can help her. We'd been arranging a trade so she could be with a trainer who has already evolved a Feebas before, but now she seems mad at me and I can't figure out why. Our previous attempts at psychic translation, I glanced at Jelly, who thankfully seemed to be off in their own little world, weren't quite successful. Well, no surprise there. Runiclus are infamous for their hilarious translations. That's what happens when you have a membrane instead of a skull. Garbled in, garbage out. But anyway, you said you thought your Feebas was upset about something? Stu locked eyes with Sai and stared at her for a few minutes. He then stood up and faced me. Your Your Serena isn't angry. She's happy. She's been talking with Lucario, who wants to cancel the trade. She just learned a new dragon type move. And that Maze guy's been super happy because he's been trying to catch a dragon type for years, but was never able to. The whole reason he wanted Serena was to teach her Ice Beam and use her and his Milotic as dual dragon catchers. But now that his Lucario can fill that role, they don't need to trade anymore. It baffled me that Serena was so happy to hear that the trade had been cancelled. I'd thought that she felt trading was her best chance at evolving. Stu read my mind and answered before I'd even formulated a question. That's the cool part. Since the Maze guy no longer wants to trade for your Serena, the Lucario thought it would be okay to reveal a secret of how Maze guy evolved his Milotic. Apparently, he took his Feebas to a special spring with extra shiny water and spent a few days pampering and bonding with him. Then they swam in the pool together and bam, instant Milotic. Now you know what you need to do. You don't have to trade your Serena away. At this, Peanut bolted off the floor and gave me a massive hug and one of his widest smiles. Snow, meanwhile, had resorted to picking up Sai's fishbowl and hugging that, since the two weren't supposed to touch. Sai swam toward her in an indirect hug. Eventually, Peanut got bored of hugging me and waddled over to embrace his teammates in yet another bone-crushing hug. While your teammates are busy, can I talk to you outside? It's important. Chapter 8. Spoons. As soon as we were out of sight of the others, Stu's chipper smile fell off his face, and he heaved a sigh. I don't think a little pampering will be enough to get your Serena to evolve. Upon seeing my confused expression, he elaborated. In order to do my job, I need to delve into the minds of my clients. I am very careful to only learn what is necessary, and I can wipe my memory upon request. But while I'm acting as an interpreter, I need to know the circumstances and background of the problems if I want to have any hope of conveying information accurately. Anyway, while I was working with Serena, I got a taste of what it feels like to be her. It's not pretty. She has the lowest self-esteem of any Pokemon I've ever met, and she's constantly miserable. I know this will probably come as a shock to you, but Serena is suffering from one of the worst cases of depression I've ever seen. I couldn't tell whether I'd gone numb or whether the world was just feeling fuzzy. But you just said she was happy. How can she be depressed at the same time? Depression isn't a mood, it's a status. You can feel the full range of emotions, but they'll always be tinted with a negative feeling. For some, it's sadness. For others, it's numbness. For Serena, it's hopelessness. She doesn't believe she can evolve, and that lack of confidence is dragging her entire life down. What's worse, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Depressed Pokemon are unable to evolve until the depression lifts. Serena is depressed. It made too much sense. The times she buried herself in a fishbowl of rocks after somebody insulted her. The fact that she constantly overslept by Feebas standards. The difficulty I had convincing her to eat enough. Those weren't quirks, they were symptoms. And I had ignored all of them and assumed that was just the way Psy worked. I wanted to ram my head against the wall until I couldn't think anymore. Instead, Stu smacked me upside the head with his spoon. I heard that. No self-harm allowed. I winced and rubbed my head. There would be a spoon-shaped knot there for at least a few days. It's different when I hurt you. It's my job for the remainder of the hour to solve your problems. And I know that one smack of my spoon will be enough to keep you from smacking yourself for at least a week. Besides, I know just how to hit you humans so as to maximize pain and avoid permanent damage. All you would have accomplished by headbutting the wall was kill brain cells without getting the distraction from the pain. Now, do you want my help for the few minutes we have left or not? I nodded, covering I nodded, hands covering my spoon mark. Good, because I'm going to tell you everything you need to do to get your Pokemon out of her funk and into a brand new state of being. Chapter 9. Terrifying kiddie pools. She needs to exercise outside in the sunlight. If you can't go to a lake, buy a kiddie pool. The only pool at the store was shaped like a cartoonish lambre head. Peanut is afraid of it. It's the only time I've seen him hesitate about anything water related. I don't care if she wants to. She needs to eat more. Make sure the health to junk ratio is at least 5-1. Even when I had exercised her to the point where she had to be starving, Sai didn't want food, and she really didn't want healthy food. After exhausting every other plan I could think of, I caved and used the airplane trick. It worked, and now she makes engine noises whenever she eats. Regular sleep is also important. That means everybody goes to bed and wakes up at the same time, or it'll ruin her schedule. My Pokemon team consists of one Pokemon whose face is literally a light bulb, a Pokemon who wears goggles every waking hour of the day because he can't stand bright lights, and a depressed Pokemon who either oversleeps or wakes up at the sound of a pin drop. It was a rough few weeks trying to get everybody sleeping at the same time, but at least I learned a new trick to make myself go to sleep. Plan a sleep schedule that everybody agrees on. Don't tell Serena she's depressed, or she'll panic and get worse. Pokemon are very bad at dealing with mental diseases, especially their own. Just treat her like a sad friend who needs a lot of cheering up and be as supportive as you can be. After I came home from class every day, I'd bring a few Pekka berries and feed them to Sai. Then I'd carry her fishbowl a mile to the nearest indoor pool, and we'd swim together for about an hour. When it was time to go home, I made sure to hug and pet her as much as I could before putting her back in her bowl. I figured she was dealing with demons she didn't even know she had, and the least I could do to help was hug her a bit more. Finally, when you think she's better, you need to do what that maze guy did with his Feebas. Go on a vacation, just you and her, and treat her like a queen. Do everything you can to make her feel happy, valued, and most of all, beautiful. If you do it right, she should evolve. After a month and a half of depression grinding, Sai seemed happier and healthier than before. It was time to take the next step. Luckily, I had an old friend who owed me a serious favor and just so happened to own a cabin they weren't using. Chapter 10. Mountain Mansions. Oh, I should change the title. There we go. Okay. I think maybe just one more chapter. Maybe. If Serena doesn't evolve, then maybe another. I wanna see how this turn plays out. Chapter 10. Mountain Mansions. Natalia was only too happy to let us use her cabin for a week, on the condition that she send some of her staff along to assist us. I objected, but she insisted that it was the least she could do for Serena, and we wouldn't even know they were there. That was a lie. When I finally got to Natalia's cabin, mountain-themed mansion would have been a more appropriate description. There were 5 Pokemon standing in a row at the entrance. All of them bowed in unison and welcomed me to Natalia's little spot in the mountains, speaking perfect human English through their translator collars. These Pokemon, a Parasect, a Slurpuff, an Altaria, a Smeargle, and a Mismagius, were members of Natalia's primary helper team. I'd often see them around whenever I visited her main house, and she never hesitated to point out just how good each of them were at their jobs. When she felt amazing, it was because the Parasect had given her an exquisite massage and aromatherapy session. If we had lunch together and I marveled at the food, it was simply because the Slurpuff was an exceptional connoisseur that everything he made was simply scrumptious. The Altaria was the reason why her house always sparkled with cleanliness and her makeup was so entrancing. And the Smeargle was why her children's Pokemon were learning Aurasphere fresh out of the egg. Finally, the Mismagius was the ultimate butler. He'd levitate guests' bags to their rooms using the quickest route possible through the walls. And though I couldn't prove it, and I would never inquire, I also suspected he was responsible for making sure that guests behaved themselves properly and didn't show their hostess any disrespect. I'd once overheard a guest complaining about some unusually realistic and terrifying nightmares he'd had while staying at Chateau Natalia. The night before he'd commented that Natalia's taste in decor was garish, so I doubt the nightmare was a coincidence. I later learned that there was a 6th Pokemon who would be accompanying us for the duration of our stay. Natalia had persuaded her husband to send his famous red Genesect as a security guard for the week. Apparently, he hoped a quiet week in the mountains would calm his Genesect down. His Pokemon, however, felt that she was already calm enough, so she had gone into the woods to take out her frustration on any intruders she could find. We probably wouldn't see her at all during our visit, and according to the Mismagius, that was probably for the best. It was well past dark by the time we'd arrived, so I declined the helper Pokemon's offers for various evening-related activities and in favor of going straight to bed. The Parasect graciously offered to help us get to sleep by using her sport technique, and I accepted. After I'd climbed into bed and repositioned Sai's bowl atop the nightstand, the Parasect raised her claws and a fine mist filled the room. I fell asleep almost instantly, but just before I closed my eyes, I thought I saw Sai press herself back against her bowl. Huh? Oh. Watching movies and VR chat with friends, but wanted to say hi. Lovely reading Kala. Ah. Thank you for the biddies, Lamia, and I hope you have a good time watching movies. That's pretty sweet, though, that they get to stay in this mountain mansion. Chapter 11, Red Claws. The next day, the Altaria woke us up with some truly beautiful singing and suggested we begin our day with the Parasect. I agreed, and carrying Sai's bowls in my arm. I agreed, and carrying Sai's bowl in my arms, followed her into the relaxation room. Inside were 2 chairs, one human-shaped and the other vague and bulky, so as to accommodate most Pokemon. Ocean sounds were playing from a sound system in the corner, and the walls were painted a tranquil shade of teal. I put Sai's bowl on top of the vaguely shaped chair and sat down on the human chair to wait for the Parasect, who came in shortly afterward. Good morning, dears. Who's first? The Parasect had a quiet, soothing voice, Just hearing her made me want to curl up and go back to sleep. Sai, meanwhile, seemed transfixed on and was barely moving. She was probably off in the world of her own thoughts, so I volunteered to get the first massage. It was heavenly. The parasect knew how to use her claws to be firm but gentle, and her careful kneading was undoing knots I never knew I had. No wonder Natalia loved her so much. By the time she'd finished, I was in a blissful stupor. The parasect scuttled over to begin working on Sai, who was pressed firmly against the side of the bowl farthest from the masseur. You don't need to be afraid, sweetie. I'm specially trained to cause no unnecessary pain, and I can be extra gentle if you're nervous. She stepped on a hydraulic pump, and the vague chair lowered enough for the parasect to be able to massage Sai in her bowl. Just relax. You'll be feeling better in no time. She lifted her claws to begin, and Sai jolted back, knocking her bowl off the chair. It broke, and water spilled everywhere. Apparently, Sai is afraid of parasect. She wouldn't let the Pokemon come anywhere near her, despite the fact that her bowl was broken and she was flopping about desperately trying to cover her gills in the puddle on the floor. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to keep her steady in her panic. So the parasect had to use stun spore so I could pick her up and bring her to the pool in the backyard. This scared her even more. I dropped Sai into the pool, and she sank like a rock. The parasect disappeared inside and came out carrying a paralyzed heel and a larger, older-looking version of the translator collar she was wearing. This collar used to belong to a Feebas, so it's pre-programmed to work on Serena. Natalia insisted we bring it along in case there was a problem. She knows how difficult it can be to communicate with fish Pokemon. Sai had adhered herself to the far side of the pool, so the parasect handed me the collar to put on her. It was a little big, and Sai was suspicious of it because it came from the parasect, but I got it on her eventually. How's it feel? Sai kept her eyes on the parasect as she replied. It feels fine. She sounded suspicious. I'm really sorry. I thought a massage would make you feel better. I didn't realize you were so afraid of parasect. Still watching the parasect, she replied, I'm afraid of her claws. They're big and red. Big red claws ate my sister. Big red claws almost ate me. Remorse flooded the parasect's eyes and spilled into her tone. I'm so sorry, dear. I didn't know. It must have hurt to lose your sister, and here I am bringing back memories of your loss. She shoved her claws under her mushroom so they weren't visible. Is this any better? It's okay, Sai said dully. You didn't know, and yes, it is. Thank you. It was understandable that the parasect, a Pokemon who had only just met Sai, wasn't aware that she'd been traumatized by a Pokemon with red claws. But I'd been her trainer for 9 years, and this was the first I'd heard of it as well. I mean, fish Pokemon were infamously difficult to read, since their faces didn't show their emotions, and their raw, untranslated speech was toneless. But you'd have thought that I'd have picked up something. Was I the only member of my team who was unaware of this massively impactful life event? Did my Pokemon know and just choose not to tell me? Did Sai try to tell me, and I had ignored it? I thumped my head into my hands. None of those possibilities were good. Whether I was ignorant, my Pokemon thought I was ignorant, or we were all ignorant, they all resulted in Sai suffering while I did nothing. It was the depression reveal all over again. Only this time, I had brought her into a situation that scared her so much she broke her bowl. Was I ever going to stop discovering ways to be a horrible trainer? You okay? Sai's translator voice brought me back to reality. She had poked her head out of the water to look at me. You seem sad. I'm just sorry, Sai. I really am. I've messed up a lot as your trainer, and you're the one who's had to suffer for it. That's not right. You hurting from my mistakes. Sai's voice was monotonous. My sister was eaten because she wanted to get stronger. She picked a fight with a corfish and lost. I still can't look at red claws. They remind me too much of that day. But I don't blame you for not reacting to something you didn't know had happened. I didn't want to tell you because it sounds so stupid, and because it's really hard to communicate something like that, and because the translator made a sound like a hiccup. It just shows how weak I am. My sister was in danger, and I just sat there and did nothing. I didn't even flee until the corfish had finished her and tried to eat me too. I saw all of it, and I did nothing. With that, Serena drifted down to the bottom of the pool and lay flat, her eyes staring up at me, but with a look like it could only see the past. I tried to call her back up, but she had gone catatonic. So I did the most logical thing I could think of. I jumped in the pool, clothes and all, and hauled her back up to the surface. There's nothing you could have done. The corfish would have just eaten you too. Sai's translator sounded mournful. I could have done something if I was stronger. I could have helped her. I could have protected her. Maybe if you were a little stronger, you could have saved her, but you weren't. So you did the smart thing. You saved yourself. You can bemoan your powerlessness until you're blue in the face, Serena. You can bemoan your powerlessness until you're blue in the face, Serena. But that won't change the fact, or that won't change the past, and it won't change the outcome of that fight. You can only change how you react to it now. There was a prolonged silence as Sai sat there, swishing slightly in my arms. Finally, she spoke. How should I react to it? I guess you should just try to use your failures to shape your successes. Maybe you weren't strong enough then, but that doesn't mean you'll never get stronger ever, you know? I mean, if your weight is anything to go by, you've gotten a lot stronger already. I can barely hold you up. Maybe I should have just laid on top of the corfish and squished it into submission. I couldn't help but snicker at that. It wouldn't have stood a chance. I could almost hear a smile in the translator's tone as she spoke. That's because it wouldn't have stood at all. I laughed a little too hard at that and almost got Serena to laugh with me. Then the parasect came over and explained that she found a way to use techniques without showing us her claws. She asked Sai if she would feel comfortable receiving an aromatherapy treatment if no claws were visible. Sai said she'd be fine with that and thanked her for her consideration. The parasect then shook her mushroom, and a pinkish mist filled the area. There was a small garden next to the pool, and as soon as the mist passed over the flower buds, they burst into bloom and sent petals flying everywhere. We watched the airborne sea of scents and petals wash over the sky until my fingers were pruned, my arms were tired, and the Slurpuff called us inside for brunch. Why is it so sad now? I, I really love the Phoebus' story. I just didn't expect it to be so sad. It's good. Yeah. But I think this is a good spot to leave off for the night. Does anyone have any raid suggestions? You did amazing. Great stream, honey. Thank you. Yeah. see someone streaming ASMR online. Oh, mute. Oh, they haven't even started. Uh, well, darn. That's okay. We can just end then. Yeah. I hope everyone enjoyed the story so far. We're on chapter 12 of 23, so uh we'll have to Yokai Watch, hello, hello. You're catching us at the very end of stream, unfortunately. But yeah, we'll have to continue the story some other time. And I'll probably have to look for another story because I like reading these. They're really nice. I like this more than the dark stuff, which is funny because I thought I'd like the dark stuff more. Turns out that's not the case. Um, Kuro did give me an idea to create a redeem where I just read a random Pokemon fact, and I think that could be cool. I just gotta figure it out because if I'm playing something, it could be a bit of a speed bump to have to stop mid game or not be able to stop. So, yeah, there's some logistics I need to look into. But I hope you all had a cozy time and don't forget to take care of yourselves. And yeah, I think Tuesday we'll be back to normal stream at normal time. I'm probably gonna continue Pokemon, and yeah, yeah. It'll be a normal stream again. So hopefully that'll be a good time. But that's gonna be all from me. Please have a good rest of your night or day, depending on where you're watching. And if you're eeping, I hope you have some good eepies. And yeah, I will see you next time. Bye bye. Bye bye.